Today we're going to be talking about the simple formula for growing as a person in business and as a part of your life. And the simple answer is to seek discomfort. And yes, this is a good play on the Yes Theory YouTube channel and their motto of seek discomfort. But really I want to talk about how I've embraced this in my life across a couple of different areas and the results that I've seen from it over time, and how you can apply this in your life and really challenge yourself and grow in all sorts of areas of life. Today we're repping a bit of a different shirt, which is the Experiences Not Things shirt. This was a gift to me from my good friend Sean, and it's a little bit on brand for the video we're talking about here, as a lot of growth has to do with experiences. I'm wearing this shirt because I just got back from a trip to India, and going to India, as well as some other countries that I've been to this year, is a great example of how putting yourself into uncomfortable situations really changes your perspective and the ways that you live life. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the first example of 3 that I have that I can point to and say pursuing discomfort and growth absolutely changed the way that I was living, and for the better. So let me set the stage. In about September, August of last year, I had just gotten promoted to being a senior finance analyst at the company I work for at the age of 22, and I was working on a team that was kind of, a good team to be on. I really loved my manager. I really loved my team. The work we were doing didn't super excite me, but it was definitely in a steady state. There was room for opportunity to kind of make changes and deliver good value as the finance team that we were to this business team. And ultimately, things were going pretty well. Since I had just gotten promoted, I had demonstrated over the course of the year that I really understood what I was doing. I was starting to make change, and honestly, if I had kept working on that team for another year, I probably would have gotten promoted again, as there was definitely the opportunity to kind of take on more work and more scope on this team. That being said, though, this would have been kind of like an easy path, in my opinion, as the team's scope of work was not extremely challenging. There was opportunity, but it wasn't in the opportunities I was looking for, whereas mainly process improvement and trying to better the operations of a business that kind of runs itself, as opposed to things that would really build and harden my skill set as a person that works in finance, or like a leader of finance at the company I work for. And so I made the decision around the time that I got promoted to actually switch teams and go from this one team to this team that I knew going in was going to push me. It was going to be challenging. It was going to make me seek discomfort. I was going to have to work long hours. I was going to have to learn a whole bunch of information about a business and a industry that I didn't know anything about. And that by switching teams, I would probably end up delaying any potential promotion, which of course impacts compensation and other stuff like this. But that if I did this, it was going to be hard. And I was probably going to learn a lot more if I made this switch. And so last year I made the switch. I joined this team, which is the most exciting project that the company I work for is working on, and everything that I just described ended up being true, as it's now a year later from me making that decision. And over the past year, I can say with confidence that I'm not getting promoted anytime soon. It'll probably take a little bit more time for that to happen, as I've accepted a new opportunity within this team where I'll be moving to London, pursuing an international role. But the main takeaway that I had over the course of the 1 year that I've been on this team is that it has absolutely pushed me and challenged me in ways that have made me a better employee and hardened the skill set I have as a person in finance. The ownership that I've been provided, the level of scope and complexity of the things that we have been tasked to do, the speed at which we have to do them based on things that are going on in the business, and every single thing about the role challenged me and it made me more confident in my skill set than I was a year ago. And so going into new roles, I've changed roles many times throughout the years with every company I've worked at, whether that was my experience at McDonald's, where I was a crew trainer and a manager, or the current company where I've kind of rose from working in a warehouse to now being a senior finance analyst. All of this stuff has taught me to take on challenges and embrace them, because ultimately it leads to better and better outcomes that help me grow personally and make me basically feel challenged. And as we've discussed in previous videos, feeling challenged and seeking discomfort, or being uncomfortable in the situations that you're putting yourself into, is ultimately extremely fulfilling fulfilling experience and leads to creating like a flow state of life where you're always learning and always growing. And so looking back, like this is a perfect example of where I feel much more in control of my career and my trajectory based on the decisions that I've made to seek discomfort actively. And it was not easy. It was absolutely hard. There were many late nights where I was kind of like, did I make the right decision? You know, this is about as hard as I expected it to be. And ultimately, looking back, it absolutely was worth it because I've learned so much just over the past year working on this team, where I absolutely made the conscious effort to go and seek discomfort. And so the next one that I want to kind of talk about is travel. And so traveling, you know, I've been traveling since a young age. I played competitive Pokemon. I traveled all over the continental U.S. in the United States, and then got some opportunities to travel internationally when I was around the age of 16. COVID ended up kind of shutting all of that stuff down, and so from about age 18 to 20-ish, I basically had to stop traveling because of COVID, and so didn't do as much international travel. And now I've really, really tried to lean into going to countries that challenge my way of thinking, that put me into new experiences, uncomfortable experiences, and kind of, you know, really translating the travel that I'm doing into an experience and not some sort of like vacation or going to compete for, you know, a Pokemon tournament or something like that. And so the three examples that I have from just this, you know, this year alone are Egypt, Morocco, and most recently India. And what I found by going to these places, you know, these countries are very different than the United States. I grew up in the United States, have not had any experience working abroad or living abroad. We'll kind of go into that in the future as that's going to be happening. But going to these countries, which you could, for lack of a better term, essentially say are like developing nations, really has changed my perspective on living in the United States and how people live in other countries. It has challenged the way I think about cultures. It has challenged the way that I think about business in other countries, etc. And so going to these places by actively seeking discomfort, and instead of going to, say, you know, I don't know what a great example would be, but like the Bahamas, where, you know, tons of people go and all this stuff, by actively putting myself into situations where the language is completely different, the culture is different, the way of life is different, I've learned so much about things that I simply didn't understand, or that, you know, the news was telling me a story about those areas that I wouldn't have had my own opinion without actually going to those places. And so it's really fascinating from a business perspective, is you learn a ton about how those countries work and how different they are from the US. You start to put connections together about, oh, this is how stuff works in this country, and this is why it's different than in the United States. You probably, you know, the cost of labor in some of those countries that I mentioned is far cheaper than the US, where that creates its own types of business opportunities that simply wouldn't work in the US just because of the way that labor costs work. Or you might realize that in some of these countries, WhatsApp is a communication tool that is also a business tool. And in the US, you know, just anecdotally, I don't have the data to suggest this, but it doesn't seem like people in the US use WhatsApp a whole lot. But pretty much any time I've ever traveled internationally or met folks from other countries, WhatsApp is like the primary communication tool. It's a payment gateway for people to do business on. It's a way for businesses to communicate with customers, all sorts of stuff. And so if you don't go to other places or travel or kind of see the world, and if you have the privilege to do so, of course, you wouldn't know how things operate outside of the US. And watching YouTube videos and stuff is great, but it's a completely different experience to go there and seek it out. And so how this relates to seeking discomfort is like, some of these countries are not places that you would just willingly go to and be okay with, as they can be quite chaotic, quite overwhelming. If you're not used to that type of experience where, for example, the roads are completely chaotic in some of these countries, and that, you know, people don't follow like laws in the way that they work in the US. It's quite a hectic experience. But by going there and experiencing that and putting myself into those environments, I've learned so much about how different countries and different cultures work, and it's completely changed my outlook on, you know, broader life, and also made me very appreciative of the kind of privilege and whatnot of growing up in the United States, just by kind of RNG of being born here. And so for number two, I've learned a ton and have broken down so many barriers in my own life about how I view those cultures and other stuff just by going there and seeking the discomfort and putting myself into those environments. And I think Yes Theory's YouTube channel almost tries to highlight that as well. And so that's kind of on brand for this. Now, the last one that I'm going to talk about, I have a kind of specific example that, I hold kind of personally. And so we're getting into a topic that I don't love to talk about. But, and that's going to be kind of dating life and whatnot. But as a broader theme, when I think about seeking discomfort, the way that I've kind of distilled it in my head more recently is anytime in my chest or in my heart I get this kind of anxiety feeling or like a little tingle of like, oh, should I do this? Should I not do this? That is the exact time to do whatever it is that I am thinking about doing. And so a more specific example of this recently is I was taking updated passport photos to get a visa to go to India. And I was standing in line, the cashier is kind of, checking me out. I had kind of messed up something by accidentally requesting physical photos when I needed digital photos. And so whatever, this is happening. And so this woman walks up behind me and is standing in line and, is just standing there. And at the CVS, I would have assumed if it's like a candy bar or something, she would have just checked out and left. But in this case, she was standing there for about the same time I was. And so the cashier asks, oh, excuse me, are you ready to check out? And she's like, nope, I also need passport photos. And so I got kind of curious. I like to meet people that are traveling. I have a lot of friends that live in other countries, and to me it's always kind of exciting to, meet people that are up to cool stuff with travel. And so I turned around and it was just like, hey, where are you going? Are you going anywhere fun? And long story short, this person is going to Senegal to join the Peace Corps that same day. Like the same day they are getting the passport photos, they're going to go to Senegal and join the Peace Corps for 2 years, which not at all where I expected this story to go. And I thought it was super cool. I thought that was really neat, really noble. She didn't know what she wanted to do after school, and so she decided to go join the Peace Corps and do that. And so as we're kind of talking, I end up getting interrupted and have to go, help the cashier with the passport photos that I'm taking. And so she disappears into the store. And so as I'm kind of sitting there thinking about this, I'm like, oh, what would be really cool is if I got this person's contact information and ended up going to Senegal someday, especially if I'm going to be moving to London, then I'll be closer to Senegal, all this stuff. It'd be really cool to have someone, in Senegal that knows the country if I were to ever randomly, be there. And so all of a sudden I got that feeling in my chest of like, oh, what is this person going to think if I go randomly ask for their contact information or any of this stuff? And I was like, you know what? Whatever. I'm going to lean into it and just go, kind of shoot my shot and see if I can get this person's contact information. So I go find them and just kind of nonchalantly, I'm like, hey, I had a good time talking to you. On the off chance that I'm in Senegal, can I get your, WhatsApp information? And she was absolutely totally cool with it. And I got someone's contact information that I might go visit in Senegal someday. Who knows? And so that's one example of where I made a friend who now lives in a different country. A cool travel opportunity could come up. Just by talking to this person, I learned all sorts of stuff. I, candidly hadn't even thought about the Peace Corps ever in my life. And so just kind of hearing her decision-making process around this was pretty fun and interesting. It was a good conversation. And so by like leaning into that and ignoring that feeling of like, oh, what is this person going to think of me? Should I do this? Am I going to be annoying? Ignoring that just completely ended up resulting in something that I think is really great. Another example of this recently is, I like to dance. And so I've been to a few dance clubs where I kind of do my own thing. I'll go with friends or whatever. And I've always kind of had this fear of like asking someone to dance with me. And so this kind of instance came up where I felt like me and this other person were kind of vibing, having a good time, and I really wanted to ask them to dance. And I got that feeling in my chest of like, oh, the thought of rejection here might not be great, that would suck. But I was like, you know what is there to lose? Like, I'm gonna, if this person says no, so be it. If they say yes, then we're gonna have a great time. And so surely, like, leaning into that feeling might work out. And so I lean into the feeling, I ask this person to dance, and we have a great time dancing. And then in India, because I had kind of gotten over this fear of asking people to dance, multiple times throughout the trip, me and my friends are now not only dancing with each other on stages in front of people, but also kind of getting people in dance clubs or other stuff to dance with us just by asking them to dance. And so by kind of overcoming this fear of what I'm comfortable with and leaning into the fact that if I seek discomfort and put myself into uncomfortable situations, these experiences are ultimately changing how my life is being lived. Because I could tell the camera a story about my trip to India, and I could say, oh yeah, we tried different foods and I experienced the culture and all this stuff. But instead, what I can now tell people is, hey, we were at this dance club till 5 a.m. dancing and I had an amazing time. Or the next day I went on to this amphitheater in this fort in the hills and danced in front of 40 plus people because I leaned into the fact that I wanted to go get up on stage and dance in front of a bunch of people. And so these experiences that I've kind of had throughout my life across work, across travel, and across, leaning into this feeling of seeking discomfort has ultimately led me to growing as a person and kind of changing my experiences. And so while you're young, lean into that feeling. My advice to you is, if you get that feeling in your chest of, should I go talk to this person? You're sitting on an airplane seat next to someone and they're reading something that looks interesting. And you're like, oh, maybe should I talk to them? Should I not talk to them? Lean into it and tell me your stories of how it's gone, or if you have any examples of this working well in your life, because I'd love to hear it. All right, I'll see you all in the next one. See you guys.